So box 4D specifically refers to psychological processing data. This needs to come from standardized measures that you're generally going to find within a psychological evaluation, and it includes things like phonological processing, as well as all the more traditional psychological, like cognitive type stuff. I have tried to include for you a list of some common tests that you might find in evaluations that would provide you this type of information. You may recall they are also listed, several of these are also listed up in the intellectual disability rule-out box. Here, though, you don't need to be focused only on composite scores. Here you can focus on any kind of composite score that you see. So not a subtest score. You're not going to put something like block design or rapid, well, that's a poor example. You're not going to put block design. You're not going to put visual puzzles. You're not going to put memory for digits. What you're going to put are things like, oftentimes things that say something like index, or stuff that on reports is typically in bold. You're going to indicate, just as with the others, strengths on the left-hand side, weaknesses on the right-hand side. And similar to other verification boxes where you've had to indicate actual scores, you're going to indicate both the score and what the score means. So for this particular student, the expanded fluid index score of 112 is in the average range. You're, of course, also going to indicate the specific test, the evaluator, and the credentials or degree of the evaluator who engaged in these tests with the student. If for some reason you make it to box 4 and there is no pattern of strengths and weaknesses, you will still indicate some kind of a verification to indicate that they don't have a strength or they don't have a weakness. It's going to be pretty rare that you can't pull out strengths. If you've made it this far on the form, it's more likely that we're unable to find weaknesses, because if they don't have strengths in a lot of these areas, often they're going to be captured under intellectual disability instead of SLD. But even weaknesses, not having weaknesses, is pretty rare at this point in the form, because that's often captured by not having, by box 1. But every now and again, you'll have an example where you say no. Just make sure that you're working with a psychologist if you feel like no is probably the appropriate answer here. Once you've done that matrix, and assuming that you have indicated a pattern of strengths and weaknesses is present, then you'll move on to box 5, which is a pretty simple, just a quick recap of your classroom observation in terms of stuff that was relevant. So, and that can sometimes, I think, be harder to find when we do a classroom observation for a student with a specific learning disability. But here's an example that one case manager, who I didn't keep very anonymous, sorry Ty, once used, which was that the student was noted to be slower to share ideas and get started on assignments than his peers during literacy. So that's the kind of thing you would put here. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Just a quick, what you noted during the observation that's relevant. From there, you're going to also indicate if there are any educationally relevant medical findings. This can be things like simple things like if the student wears glasses. It can also be if the student takes medications or anything like that. It's not a rule-out box. So if there are relevant medical findings, don't be shy to share them here. This is something that's going to hopefully be helpful to the team. So if there are any relevant medical findings, you can indicate them. If there aren't, you can just say there aren't. Box 7 is hopefully a pretty easy yes, and if you check yes, you don't need to provide any verification. Are the evaluations valid and reliable, and were they performed by someone who's qualified? The only times that you would say no is if you had some real true reason to believe that the person who did the evaluations wasn't qualified, or if they used some test that nobody's ever heard of before. So as I've indicated in very professional language, a really sketchy outside eval kind of thing. So if you have that happen, please check with a school psych before you check no, so that we can help and make sure that you're on the right track there. If you've made it that far and you've checked all the right boxes so it looks like the student's going to qualify, then we're going to say yes, the specific learning disability exists. Question 9 is the part where we're really determining, does the student require an IEP to address that learning disability, or is this perhaps something that can be accommodated through a 504 plan or some other kind of gen ed intervention? If an IEP has, we've determined that's warranted, they need some specially designed instruction, then we're going to say A. If a 504 or gen ed intervention can address it, then we'll say B. And then you're going to provide a summary here that describes that. The 3 pieces of information that you want to make sure are included in that statement will be the cognitive weaknesses, the academic weaknesses, and what are we doing to support the student for a student who qualifies. So for this particular case, we're saying the test results indicate that the student presents with below average range working memory, processing speed, and rapid symbolic naming, which manifest for this particular student as academic weakness in reading fluency. Because he's reading at a 3rd grade level of proficiency, he requires specially designed instruction in reading. If he didn't qualify, then we would rework that statement accordingly. And instead of saying we're providing specially designed instruction, you might say we're providing a 504 plan, or, the statement might simply say, because the student is able to achieve at grade level, or that might not be the most appropriate thing if he does have some evidence of a learning disability, but whatever the statement is, you can indicate either he needs specially designed instruction, he needs accommodations, or he is able to benefit from grade level instruction in the general education setting. Once you've done all that, you do need to obtain signatures. Folks need to either agree or disagree with the team. If someone disagrees with the team, they do need to provide a written separate statement indicating their disagreement. So that is your SLD form. It's a pretty long one, so don't be shy to ask for help when you need it. Your BBCs are there for you, as are all the members of the site team.